So my name is Bob Donald. I work with One Seed Forward. We're a community growing initiative based in the northeast of Scotland. We've been on the go for over 4 years now, started just at the start of 2017, with the simple idea of encouraging people to, of all ages, to grow their own food and to really encourage them to eat healthily and seasonally, and also to share their produce and their knowledge with others in the community, so the community basically embraces all of it. I could probably talk a lot more about that One Seed Forward, but we've got a great new website which you can go on and find out all about us. So I'll actually basically crack straight into the presentation this evening. And the presentation is all about the history of community gardening in Aberdeen. I think when people think about community gardening, then really allotments is really probably the fundamental thing that they think about, and that's really where an awful lot of this really sort of like started. And without, my background is actually in finance, and so you'll be delighted to know that I've got lots of legal acts to talk about this evening, that basically reference about how the development of the allotment process happened in the cities. Okay, so history of allotments. So really, the growing popularity from the late 1800s, and this was as a recognition of the fact that people were really sort of trying to have the ability to feed themselves, simple as that. And there was a recognition that it was pretty difficult for people to be able to get access to fresh food. And so quite often local landowners really decided that they would actually give up some of their land to the poor in order for them to create growing spaces that they could then basically use for feeding their families. In the UK, the first Parliamentary Act was actually specifically related on allotments, was specifically related to Scotland, and this was the Scotland Act of 1892. You'll be delighted to know that I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about that in the next slide, but this will put into context exactly what people started thinking about as far as allotments and how the scope of allotments actually changed during this time. And for those of you who have been sort of following on Facebook, we're looking for a sort of like funky fact to whet your appetite to get you involved in joining this evening. And when they started looking at the size of these allotments, they decided that they'd be measured in poles, rods and perches, which is an Anglo-Saxon measurement. And if you're wondering how big a pole is officially the length from the back of a plough to the tip of an oxen's nose, which is deemed to be 5.5 yards or 5 meters. I suppose it depends how big your plough or your oxen was as well, but this was the method and the number that they actually used. So during the Great War, obviously there was a lot of people who were then sort of like seconded into looking at trying to feed the population, and allotments really sort of grew from the fact that a lot of people who were working on agriculture during the war started to gain a lot of knowledge about how growing was done. And so servicemen and women from that war were given priority when we were looking at the history of allotments. Now in June 1920, the Parliamentary Secretary for the Board of Agriculture, Sir Arthur Griffith, said that there had been no better movement in the country in recent times than the allotment question. It had broken down barriers between those in the country and the town, and interested people in engaging in food production. He also went on to say, "We want to cultivate this land to the best of our ability. We have not made the most of it in the past, and we found out during the war how dangerously dependent we were upon foreign imports. A great deal of the food that we habitually import from abroad, we could have grown at home, and the effort made by farmers during the years 1978 to 18 when the submarine menace was serious were the most successful." So, so basically what we're seeing with that is that it's pretty relevant to what's happening today. You know, the whole point is that you have to try and make sure that you're self-sufficient in your food production, and relying on foreign imports is not the way to sort of basically do things. And particularly if we're looking at trying to maintain climate, if we're thinking about aspects of biodiversity, where we're looking at the kind of crops that are grown locally, and if we're going to eat seasonally, then in order to eat seasonally, we really need to eat and we need to grow locally. And I'm sick of seeing tomatoes at any time of the year, which are basically, they may be red balls of veg, but they're really, or fruit, I suppose, but really they're pretty tasteless and they've been flown halfway around the world. So I think it's actually quite pertinent that even in those days they were recognising, albeit from a different perspective, that there was really a need for us to really sort of look at where our food was coming from, and if we wanted to be sufficient and actually eat healthily and actually eat what was in season, then what better way than doing it than growing it ourselves. So the Allotment Scotland Act of 1892. So in this, it was actually a definition of what an allotment was. And to start off with, an allotment would be a large piece of ground that wouldn't be any more than 1 acre. And it would always be for rent, you couldn't actually buy it. And it would be given to an individual or a family for agriculture or horticultural processes and purposes. So we're really seeing at that point that, you know, included, it wasn't just about growing fruit and veg, it was also about grazing livestock and basically having sort of like animals kept on there. So in your 1 acre, you could grow whatever you wanted, but you could easily have, well, probably your oxen that we were looking at for measurement, and maybe cows and everything on there. Probably fine unless you were in the neighbouring allotment and found that the animals started to sort of like think that, oh, your crops are pretty good, I'll go and have a wee munch on those. It may not have been the best thing, so I hope there was actually some decent fencing to keep these things apart. Then the idea of allotment gardens was introduced. So this is actually a much smaller amount of land, and they were of 1/4 acre or smaller, and again for personal and family use. And specifically, you could keep poultry and pigs on these as well. So again, we're seeing it as probably from nowadays much more of an urban farm idea and collective than just some of the restrictions that we see at the moment, obviously with allotments that are council owned. And what was interesting as well, this was the start of the time when local authorities had been given a duty to provide and develop allotments. And this is something that has continued and continues now with a bit more push and relevance as by some of the other acts that have superseded this one that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And particularly in cities and in towns that were larger, the population than 10,000 people, allotment gardens could actually be smaller. So it wasn't restricted to this 1/4 acre. It could be smaller, it could be an 1/8 acre or about 500 square meters or 20 square poles if we want to basically go back to our old Anglo-Saxon measurement. So when I was doing some research on this topic, I was trying to find when the first allotment site was in Aberdeen. And through the Records Office, I found this. It's in GALLOWHILL allotment, is what it was called. And it's actually close to the site of Pittodrie Stadium, very close to the Trinity Cemetery. I do have a map that I will show you in the next slide. And according to the records in 1920, it had 66 garden plots, as it was called there. So if we think back to the last slide where we were talking about allotment gardens, so they were called garden plots in this Aberdeen register. The annual rent was between 5 shillings and £2 and 5 shillings. That's pretty expensive, you know, if you think about it at the time in 1920, but obviously showed that there was quite a wide range of allotment sizes that were available. I quite like this little fact about the tenants as to who were there. So we had various working people, plumbers, engineers, joiners, a couple of policemen, a comb maker who would definitely be out of business in my house, and a scavenger who probably would be well in business in my house, looking at all the rubbish that I've got in here. What was interesting specifically is that they referred to the one plot holder, Mr. Archibald Chisholm of Dunbar Street, as being a gardener, and get the feeling that basically that Archibald was probably seen to be the go-to guy. So if you were needing any advice, I think that he was the person that things were put onto. Now, I did say that we had a map, and so this is the map that I could find of GALLOWHILL, and I think this map is dating to around about 1925, I think was what it said on it. You'll see Pittodrie up there, definitely plenty of scope for allotments there, I would suggest in a few years' time, potentially. And GALLOWHILL shelter, basically up at Trinity Cemetery. So we think that the allotment site was somewhere around about here in this Errol Street, Seaforth Road area. Now, what's interesting about that is that at the moment there are various people, various groups who are looking at this at Errol Street, with the potential of actually Errol Street being taken back into being used as an allotment site. That's one of the proposals for some of the land that is there. So I just find it fascinating that in a century, what we've done is we've basically gone from having an allotment site to house building with some space, and then some of that space now being reconsidered along with the housing to be basically put back into allotments. So I think it just goes to show you that, like everything, like lots of things, what goes around comes around. So I was really interested by that bit of fact. I want to tell you a little bit about what the current state of allotments are in the city at the moment. So Aberdeen City Council has 21 sites throughout the area, and there are 516 plots within those sites. The plot ranges are quite big, so depending on which allotment site you're at, some sites have only full-size plots, others have 3/4 or half-size plots, and some have micro plots. So typically what we're seeing in Aberdeen at the moment is a plot size range between 50 square metres and 300 square metres. Personally, I think that the idea of micro plots, particularly nowadays, is really important, because quite a lot of people who are really interested in sort of taking part perhaps don't realise the amount of work that there is involved in taking on an allotment, and being given a large 300 square metre site is almost a full-time job. I mean, there's an awful lot of work that's actually involved in it. And so I think actually sort of taking people through various stages is probably a really good way to make sure it's really what they want to do and that they're actually interested in it. I first gave this talk to the Friends of Cruikshank Garden just in March 2020, just before we got closed down with COVID. And at that point in time, the latest information I could find about the waiting lists showed that in January, at the end of January, there were 316 people on the waiting list as first choices for plots in Aberdeen City Council plots. By the end of December of the year, that had more than doubled to 705 people. So by December 2020, we know that there'd been a growing interest, that people have been looking for things to do during the start of the pandemic, and again, we're looking at where the food was coming from, and there was a real interest taking part in where things were growing, how things were growing, and that's obviously converted itself into the allotment waiting list. I actually just found out last week that the waiting list now sits at over 900 people in Aberdeen. Wow. Now, 900 people for 516 plots basically is a demand of 175% of the supply. Now, being an old accountant, I could have easily sort of given you a lovely graph, but good news, it's a Friday night, so I'm letting you off without any graphic capabilities there. But it really does go to show you that there is an issue that we have to address as far as the demand is concerned. And it could be seen to be a trend. I mean, there's a trend in it. Is it a lasting trend? Well, given the fact that I think in 2018, the waiting list was somewhere around about 160, then, you know, there was definitely a trend prior to COVID happening. And I think there's definitely a trend exceeding that. So we need to really look at it, and the council are looking at ways of how we address this. And to an extent, part of the reason for having our Community Gardening Festival this weekend was so that we could introduce people who are looking for activities to perhaps growing areas that are close to them that they weren't even aware of. In Aberdeen City, there are also some private sites. There's Heatheryfold, Nether Lauriston and Sunnybank. So these are not sites that are actually run by the council. Now, just to make life difficult for myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and run a YouTube video for you. So apologies if this doesn't work, but this is a scan of Heatheryfold allotments. There's no sound to it, or if there is, then I'd be pleasantly surprised. But this just lasts a minute, just to give you an idea of what Heatheryfold allotments look like. For those of you who don't know where Heatheryfold is, it runs along the Great Northern Road and out past the Hardigan roundabout, and actually is parallel to Hardigan roundabout. So you can see from this that they're actually pretty well developed sort of like sites as a private site, and they're fairly large plots by the looks of them. There's quite a mixture of facility on it as well. There's quite a lot of polytunnels there too, and certainly it's like plenty of scope for doing things. And that wee bit of a tree shelter, I'm sure, helps quite a lot. There you go, great, super, okay, excellent. There you go. That was almost like professional. You know, for me, that was just amazingly good. Right, okay. For those of you who are not in the city, I did want to just basically sort of like give a wee nod to what the situation is with the allotment sites in the Shire. So Aberdeenshire Council has 6 sites that they own, with 37 plots, and you can see those listed there in Ellen, in Huntly, and Inverurie, etc. The council also leases 7 sites with an additional 195 plots in Stonehaven, Huntly, Banff, Peterhead, Kemney, Mintlaw. My understanding is that the waiting list is full again for all of this. If it isn't, I apologise, but I think that's the records that I saw that was the case. Not an awful lot of plots when you think about the size of the Shire compared to the size of Aberdeen, but then again, it's a more of a, you know, an area where people have a bit more space and actually sort of like do tend to sort of like be very, very good at growing their own food. Okay, I wanted to just very sort of quickly tell you about our One Seed Forward community allotment, which is actually in Nellfield. This is our allotment. Basically, it sits as one of 6 plots in a sort of like up an alleyway that, you know, you wouldn't know was there until now that I've told you. You can go away and steal all my turnips. The size of them are basically as a fairly standard full-size plot, and 30 metres by 10 metres, so 300 square metres. 12 poles or thereabouts, I think, is what, if the calculations right. What was interesting, the reason I actually wanted to basically sort of like show you this picture was that 2 weeks ago I was working in the allotment, and this old elderly gentleman came in and was just wandering about, and he transpired that he used to actually live in the houses at the back of our allotments, and he lived there. He was born in 1941, and he lived there until he was 10. And what was interesting was he told us that this wall here that there was extended right down to the bottom of the garden, their back garden. And on the opposite side of that wall, there were basically, these were just general gardens. But this side of the wall going back, so there's actually 4 plots extended to a wall here, were actually allotments at that point in time. So I think it's a kind of confirmation that probably actually even post Second World War, and certainly in the 50s, there seemed to be this push by the council to create allotment growing spaces. And again, with the whole Victory Gardens idea of sort of like, you know, growing your own food during the war times, then the demand was there for it. So it was really just great. So a really lovely gentleman. I had a good chat with him for half an hour. And thankfully, I managed to get rid of a couple of courgettes, so, you know, plenty of those to go around. So I think he left happy, and I was happy to get a bit more information about our plot as well at the same time. So moving on to sort of like local times now in 2015, and the Scottish Government created this Community Empowerment Act in 2015 with certain rights really to try and get communities emboldened in what they could do. So there was new rights for community bodies, and there was also new duties placed on public sector authorities, councils, etc., to try and meet the demands of the community groups that were asking for facilities. So a greater participation in local democracy, and there was also an aim for local people to basically become immersed with some more skills. We want to encourage volunteering within the communities, and they wanted there to be a greater satisfaction and quality of life in the neighbourhood. And to that end, every council was instructed to create a food growing strategy, which was due to be published had to be published, I think, in April 2020, to try and sort of look at meeting some of the demands that were embraced in this act. So Aberdeen City Council's food growing strategy is actually very, very detailed. And it's actually quite a really good piece of work. And if you come onto our One Seed Forward website and have a look at the section on growing spaces, you'll find links to that strategy, and also links to a lot of food growing spaces that there are in the city from a map that's been created by the Sustainability Department within the council. So please go and have a look at that. It's actually quite interesting. So what was actually the idea behind the food growing strategy for Aberdeen? Well, the council said that they would actually look at basically making more opportunities for food growing, and for obviously the health benefits, and also the issue of food poverty, which in a city, when you think about the amount of money has gone through it, and there's a real disparity between the people who've got money and people who don't. In all cities, but in Aberdeen, considering that you had oil, it's a bit of a shame that we've actually got to that situation. But regardless of that, the council are actually basically doing something about that, which is great. And also they've got this idea about looking to try and sort of get an increase in biodiversity and realising about the issues of climate change. And so you can do that within growing spaces. And so again, it's by choice of plants. And if you go back to my little tirade about tomatoes, growing tomatoes, local varieties, heritage varieties here, heritage plants, and thinking about sort of the site design and management, managing water supply and managing the soil and how the soil is actually sort of maintained and cared for, are all things that are embedded within the council's strategy for making this a bit more of a climate friendly and biodiverse friendly area. And again, there was an encouragement for community-led enterprises and social enterprises to make available an uptake of food growing opportunities. And we're going to be able to talk about all that. And I know some of you on the call are heavily involved in those. And it would be nice to maybe sort of like just have a few words from you maybe later on about the impact that you've actually had on that. And also the strategy basically had this endeavour to make that all the food growing spaces were really basically led by communities, served by public transport, and had good facilities, and as well as being practical to basically do. There's always a caveat, isn't there, as far as it's practical. So basically, yeah, there's some places where you have to realise that it's not possible to do it in the current structures, but maybe we can look at how we can actually make sure more people are involved in it. So I want to talk again about community growing projects in Aberdeen City. There's been several projects that have been started by local groups over the past few years, and in various ways. Some have acquired the land, and others have had the space gifted to them, and others have had a change of use by the local council to basically sort of like move that land. We're seeing that ourselves through the Keep Growing Aberdeen project. So Rebecca and Anne-Marie, who I think both may be on the call this evening, and Nonya. Basically, we represent various groups. Rebecca, as I've said already, is basically food growing coordinator based through CFINE. Anne-Marie is basically with Tullis Wildlife Garden, as well as with the council, and Nonya is with the Aberdeen Health and Social Care Partnership. And we formed a partnership called Keep Growing Aberdeen with the idea of looking at how we could assist people through the start of the pandemic with something to do, and really giving away free growing kits and to enable them to do that. The demand was great. We gave away, excuse me, about over 200 the first year. The second year of our project's actually expanded to be that, and also to be a series of food cooking videos, which we'll hear about later on, and also about trying to create new growing spaces within the city. And we've managed to do that. We've identified 3 spaces in the city, one in Printfield, one in Northfield, and one in Seaton. And work is underway, and in fact one of those is already established to basically sort of have a growing space created with the ability to expand that space. The council have been incredibly supportive of that, and we've been really grateful about basically making that happen. And what we're going to do is eventually, certainly before the end of the year, there will be a booklet with flow charts, hopefully, which will be available for everybody to sort of see how they could go about and who they need to speak to in order to create growing spaces. I've also mentioned in this slide here, you'll see there about the edible food trails. Again, the Shire are incredibly creative. Huntly is going to come up a lot because I love Huntly, and from a food growing perspective, it's amazing the work that they've actually done. And I would really like us to sort of see, would it be possible for us to create edible food trails in areas of Aberdeen, possibly through areas of Aberdeen? Sorry, I think there is somebody who's not muted, so if you wouldn't mind actually making sure you're muted, please. I would try and do it myself, but I've already sort of like said about my inability to be able to do some of these things. So if you wouldn't mind muting, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so the first group I'm going to be talking about is Bonnymuir Green. So Bonnymuir Green was originally a beautiful walled garden and one of the oldest houses in Mid-Stockett in Aberdeen, and was given to the community in 1924 for a nominal cost to start a bowling club. The bowling club was set up as a limited company to own the land, and this transferred to a trust in 2008. In the title deeds, it was a condition that the green would remain a bowling green at all times for the future. However, the legitimacy of these conditions changed in 2004 when the recording of land moved from the Sacian Register to the new Land Register. There was a 10-year period where these conditions could have been reinstated by the owners, but unfortunately it didn't happen, and the time period to do that elapsed in November 2014. The bowling club that owned the land then made a decision to close the club at the start of 2015, and the green was being looked at by property developers. After a neighbourhood consultation, the Bonnymuir Group informally formed to look at developing sustainable community options to purchase and use the green within the spirit of the original gift of the land for community use. The objective was to retain this fantastic space as a historical green space, registered as an urban green space actually in the City Master Plan, and as a community resource and not see it exploited for commercial gain. If you've gone to Bonnymuir Green now, you will see the amazing work that they have done, and tomorrow they celebrate their 3-year anniversary. I remember going to see it before anything had been done on it, peeking over a wall and sort of like trying to work out what they could do with it. They have created a brilliant urban community hub right in the centre of the city that promotes a green lifestyle and a sustainable lifestyle. Gardens open most days and they're always looking for volunteers, and they've also got a great cafe. They host different types of events, so they're going back now to hosting yoga and Pilates sessions. They've just had an art event on display in the cafe, and they'll be continuing to do that. They really have a range of raised beds, and they've got a polytunnel, and they've just installed beehives, so they've got the bonny bees in there now as well. The green is an amazing amount of things that they've actually got in it, all compartmentalised into different rooms. So there's a little pond, there's a calming seating area, and there is a play area for kids. There's a wildlife area. They've created a wee fruit orchard area. It's fantastic, and everything there can be basically collected for produce from the site, and you can make a donation for what you take. So if you've not been there before, please go. Tomorrow they are, as I say, basically celebrating their 3rd-year anniversary. They've got a barbecue involved. There's even some alcohol and non-alcoholic beverages available, and it's definitely worthwhile going to see regardless. It's a great site, and it's a great testament to the work that community have actually done to create that. To speak about Anne-Marie's involvement in the Tullis Community Wildlife Garden, and again, basically just want to sort of highlight that. Again, these are projects that One Seed Forward have been involved in, so that's why we've chosen these ones. It was an unused overgrown space very close to the old Tory Academy, in behind housing, and basically a lot of work done to it, and it opened in May in 2018. They took the local Tory residents along with them, and basically developed a plan and what people wanted within there. As I say, it's got 8 planters, a wildlife mural, it's got benches for sitting, it's got a vertical growing wall, it's got mud kitchens, it's got sort of like little seating areas. It's a great place, and again, what's really good is it's an accessible space for people who have got pushchairs, or if actually sort of for wheelchairs as well. Lovely site, and again, a hidden gem. And so if you get a chance to go, again, they are actually, I think, got something on the programme on Sunday, I believe. So yeah, please try and go along and sort of visit that. It's a really nice space that they've got in Tullis. One of my favourite groups in Aberdeen, and I'm going to be biased, this is the Powys Residents Group. I never cease to be amazed by what they've been doing every time I kind of go up there. we basically started supplying them with seed potatoes, like, well, many of you, in 2017. And every year, well, certainly up until the pandemic, we used to have a potato cooking. And the potato cooking basically used to be great. So what we would do is we would actually cook up lots of different varieties of potatoes and we'd do taste tests with them. And it was just a great fun day, and lots and lots of things to learn about it. The whole idea about it was to basically sort of like take forward regeneration projects in the area, and it does have people of all ages who are basically looking after the project. And in 2019, it basically was awarded the Young People Discretionary Award by Keep Scotland Beautiful. This is what was actually said in the submission of it. This is a unique community where the environment, culture and outdoor shared space has been transformed. This has been achieved in a truly organic way, and a way which reflects the wishes and ideas of the whole community, where children are valued and involved as much as the adults. Young people are at the heart of everything in this residential community. They mow the grass, they pick the crops, they select what plants to grow, as well as being involved in litter picks. They're welcomed into the permaculture forest allotment, which is run by Alan Carter, which you have to go and see. It's amazing, absolutely fantastic, where they learn about garden to plate in a very real way, in a way which engages their interest in learning. The many children in the community followed the judges throughout the tour, keen to chat and show things they had created or grown. Through the children, it had been possible to engage with and involve harder to reach adults, for example, some of the men and women from different ethnic backgrounds. In return, the children and young people enjoy safe and friendly spaces to play and to congregate. Young people learn in an informal way about horticulture, about wildlife and about biodiversity. And there's so much enthusiasm being generated that St Macer Academy is considering developing a foundation apprenticeship in horticulture. And that's something that I think I would love to see throughout schools in the city, I think, as a way forward. Powys residents are not only cultivating flowers and crops, but also a healthy community where things are shared, people are respected, and there's a responsible approach to the environment, both on a very local level and also in the broadest global sense. So a real endorsement of the Powys group by the judges from Keep Scotland Beautiful, and that's why they won that discretionary award in 2019. Also want to sort of have a wee chat about the Secret Garden Society. This is an area that I use beside the Butchert in Old Aberdeen. It's basically supported by the Aberdeen University Students' Union. The society was formed by students who had an interest in basically growing and learning to grow. They host various events throughout the year, and they grow fruit and veg for the benefit of their fellow students. This is quite an old photograph actually, but the growing space has been extended from what you actually sort of like see there. They again are running a whole bunch of activities. I'm looking forward to going to a practical workshop tomorrow afternoon, which we're going to be doing butterfly puddles, I believe, and seed bombs. So really looking forward to sort of seeing what all that's about. But again, it's great. It's got a changing group, obviously, because it's run by the students who are actually in there. But the enthusiasm is always super when you go and visit them. So it's a really nice space to go and see. And certainly, please, if you can, go to some of the events that they're hosting over the next couple of days. Okay, nearly at the end here, but I want to sort of throw something out here. We've got the situation, as we said before, about the fact that now we've got 900 people on a waiting list for allotment sites in Aberdeen. There are lots of community growing spaces that are looking for volunteers, and we would encourage everybody to take part and do that wherever possible. But I've got a proposal. This is Woodside Primary. As part of our garden school programme that One Seed Forward developed with the University of Aberdeen, we built or helped to build gardens in primary schools around the city that could be used for outdoor learning. With the whole push with the pandemic, outdoor learning is seen to be a much more important thing to do, and we all can see the health benefits and well-being benefits of gardening outside. In a situation where I think that there is a restriction on the amount of space that is readily available, why not actually basically put the school at the heart of the community, because that is in the heart of the community for many of these places. and to sort of basically open up these gardens so they can actually be used by and supported by the community. So as an option, it's certainly happening in some schools. I would like to sort of see it extended as far and wide as we possibly can. But if we're looking for growing spaces, there's probably actually growing spaces right on our doorstep that we can actually look at, as well as the ones that we know that the council are actually looking at the moment to try and sort of address these issues. That's me off my hobby horse on that one, but before we go, basically wanted to just basically very quickly touch on the benefits of community gardening. So, you know, we know that gardening's got lots and lots of health benefits, and there are so many benefits in gardening. First, gardening helps to reduce depression and it improves your mental health. Not only does vitamin D help you keep you from becoming depressed, but studies have found that caring for plants has helped many people feel happier. Second, gardening helps your immune system, to improve your immune system, and basically the friendly soil bacteria that's found in garden soil has been shown to reduce allergies and asthma. Thirdly, gardening has been shown to help prevent Alzheimer's. It's unknown exactly why it does this, but perhaps it's because gardening requires strength, endurance, dexterity, learning, and basically really keeps your heart healthy and reduces the risk of stroke. Sitting around too much basically risks heart disease, diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, so on. It's really important you move around. Gardening's a great chore. Who would have thought I would have said that? I think people that knew me would never have sort of expect me to ever say that. Basically, but it gets you out, being in the sunlight, and it reduces your stress. So whether you feel stressed or not, you're most likely you're going to feel happier after gardening. And there's all these other benefits as well about the fact that it's helping wildlife, it's saving you money. It produces a whole range of great vegetables, whether you want to eat them or not. And also basically you can learn so much. So there's this great intergenerational learning that can be done as a result of being out in a community garden. Okay. And then just basically to sort of remind you that this weekend the Community Garden Festival is happening in Aberdeen. I've mentioned it a few times already. There are lots and lots of different events that are taking place, and maybe with a bit of luck we might find out a little bit more about those at the moment.